We are recording.
Wonderful. This is a great topic. I am very glad to be with you tonight. And I have to say, I'm seeing familiar faces. A lot of people don't have their cameras on, though. That makes me sad because I like seeing, eye to eye. But it is good to be with you. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I want to thank Pastor Eric for the invitation. He really does such a wonderful job of just really reaching out to me every once in a while and connecting and saying, here's what we're doing at our church. Here's what we're excited about. These are the things that we're moving forward on. And so I am very grateful for the collegiality of your interim pastor and just the partnership. So thank you, Pastor Eric. Did you want to start with questions, or
I can start with a question. Basically, this is the Illinois. First off, why is there an Illinois? Do you guys even know why is there an Illinois South Conference and an Illinois Conference? Do you even know? Because
that's a great question.
You were in the Illinois Conference at one time.
Yes, and I'm curious if anyone on this call knows why. So there are actually 38 conferences in the United Church of Christ. And the reason for a conference is so that you have local staff persons that can attend to your needs, and you can be in relationship and have a quick response time to questions. One of the reasons that I think really, as you look at the state of Illinois, why that decision was made of it being what I would call more northern Illinois and southern Illinois. Now, Illinois Conference does not call themselves, northern Illinois, but there's a big difference between Chicagoland area and southern Illinois in terms of the culture, in terms of the industry, also just in terms of the pace. And Eric, you're right. I served in Chicagoland area. I actually grew up in central Illinois. So I was from East Peoria. And I often say just Peoria because when I would say East Peoria, people would say, where's that? And when I'd say, well, it's east of Peoria, it kind of sounded like a smart aleck, but I was like, that's where it's at. So I grew up in central Illinois, and I was ordained through the Illinois Conference and had served in Illinois. And I knew from growing up, even in central Illinois, there was sort of this divide between really northern Illinois and downstate. And what I thought was interesting was coming from serving in Chicago and then coming to southern Illinois, I was reminded again just of those nuances and differences. And one of the bigger nuances is that for us in southern Illinois, we're probably much more connected to Missouri Mid-South, to the St. Louis area. As you look at Eden Seminary, which Eden Seminary was an evangelical and reformed seminary, and our churches that spread out from the seminary were evangelical and reformed churches. We have very few congregational churches in Illinois South Conference. Those that have congregational in their name really don't function and don't have kind of the traditional markers of congregational church, where Northern Illinois certainly has more evangelical and reformed churches, but they also have congregational churches, as well. And so there was, from the beginning, a real decision that the state would be two conferences. It is very rare because we have a lot of conferences that are several states, tri-states. I think one of the things that I treasure the most about serving in Illinois South Conference is I get to know the churches really quite well because of the close geography. I know the churches. I get to know people in the churches. I have, colleagues that they have such a spread out geography that in the span of 5 years, maybe they don't get to all of the churches. And maybe the whole time that they're in ministry, they actually don't get to be able to be in every church, you know, in the conference. So that was a long answer. Sorry, I'll try to quicken up my answer. The occupational hazard of a preacher, you know.
No, that was good. I would like to just play off that because I've been in the Illinois South Conference for 6 months, isolated for 3 of those 6. But I've gotten to know 18 of my colleagues already. I mean, that's how close it is. Because I've been in conferences where it's tough to get to know your colleagues. Yeah, I mean, they may be there, but there's a little more connection here. They connect really well. So
yeah, they do. And I hear that from candidates that are interviewing with Illinois South Conference. And I just talked to a potential candidate that's interviewing with our conference. And one of the things that they said was they could tell already that this conference was so much more connectional, whether that's just the size or just it's part of it, but part of it is also just the ethos, you know, and the personality of Illinois South Conference, which I think is beautiful, because you think about in your church setting, how many people you know in other UCC churches, you know, and how many times that you've done mission projects or, you know, shared ideas. There are sometimes in places where it's so siloed that you could serve for 10, 15 years and not really know the church that's a neighborhood, you know, over, let alone really kind of your colleague.
there's that closeness. So that's the quick history. Thank you. Which seminary did you go to? Chicago?
I went to Eden Theological Seminary. So I'm an Eden grad.
I'm United. Up in St.
I actually, in my family, I probably failed in being a true UCC because the tagline is Elmhurst, Eden, Eternity. And I didn't go to Elmhurst, you know, so, but okay. I've got that E.
So here's something just to give the folks a feel for the conference is how many churches or congregations are there in the Illinois South Conference?
There are 77 churches in Illinois South Conference, and we are a conference that what we call acts as an association. And so in some conferences, you have broken up regions where those associations function independently somewhat of the conference. Now we have regions, so we have 7 regions, and those regions, it really, what happens mostly is that pastors will get together, you know, and be support to one another. Some of our regions, they will do certain projects together, but we have one unified governing system, which I often talk to my colleagues and they'll say, oh my goodness, that is so much easier, because when you have associations, they may think of it this way. It's sort of like each association would have a church council, you know, and so imagine if you're trying to make unified decisions, if you have several church councils that are trying, you know, or consistories that are trying to make, you know, decisions. So we are a conference that acts as an association. We have 77 churches. Those are from really Springfield, you know, on down to like the Marion area. And from the conference office, this is also one of the things I love, is from the conference office, really the longest drive that I have to a church would be a little bit towards 3 hours, but I can do that in a day. So if there is a church that is in crisis or really, you know, needs someone there at that moment, I am, you know, a drive away. It's not a plane ride for me. You know, it's not, okay, well, I can't get to you for a couple of weeks. It's, I'll rearrange my schedule and I'll get on the road probably the next day, if not that day.
And of that, how many approximately, what's the total membership of all the congregations combined? How many people are we talking about?
Oh, I didn't look on the data hub for that kind of information. I don't know.
Just get a ballpark figure. I don't have that here either.
Yeah, I wouldn't even
know. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it changes so much anymore. Yeah. So just thought okay, we caught you on that one. Okay.
I know, it's like stump the conference minister. Pastor Eric won.
So so the conference and I just want to highlight what you said, because me being in the Illinois conference, we have 5 associations. And so I'm on the Illinois Conference Council. I'm on the Eastern Association Council. I function in 2 different capacities with that. And we are in the process of calling a new conference minister, and each of the associations had to separately meet the candidate.
Right.
One big, to do. So, and as driving distance, our conference office is in Westchester. And on a Saturday morning, I always say Saturday morning, I can get there in about 35 minutes. I was coming home from one meeting. It took me 2 hours and 45 minutes to get home.
Yep.
So,
that's on traffic.
It all depended on traffic, yeah. So,
right.
I don't have to deal with that around here, so that's good. Now, and everyone says, what goes on with the conference? And I was looking up the various teams and committees, right? And first thing, you mentioned about the conference gathering, right? Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So our annual meeting is really the gathering of all of our churches together to make joint decisions about the work of the conference. And think about it, in your local church, you have congregational meetings. And some of those congregational meetings are, especially your annual meeting, you will go through, practical things like, here's what the proposed budget will be, for this coming year, as well as here's the communication, here's the reports of all the things that our teams have been doing. Well, essentially that is what a conference annual meeting looks like. It is really twofold. It's the business of the conference, so that once a year, the entire body, which each congregation has an opportunity to choose delegates. And I have to say that Rodney, I think, is the only delegate that has come from Evangelical UCC in a long time. And I see Rodney, every year. And Rodney and I often will have this conversation where he will say to me, I wish more people would come to annual meeting. And it's not because of the business. We do a business section, but we also have a worship time together, and we have a keynote speaker. Sometimes we will, the day before, since we have moved to a one-day conference meeting, we will have all kinds of workshops. But it's also just a great way, and Rodney can attest to this, of connecting with other churches. And when you hear the stories of other churches like yourselves, you don't feel as alone. You start to realize, oh, those things that we say, oh, poor us, we're the only ones that are dealing with this. You hear that, and you realize, okay, we're sharing the same kind of, struggles or growing pains as other churches. And then you also are able to be in conversation with other churches where you hear a program or something that they're doing that you go, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. We could so do that, at our church. So our annual meeting is really intended to be doing the business, of the conference. During the year, it is our conference council, much like it is your consistory, that does most of the major decisions on behalf of your congregation for us in the conference. It would be our conference council does the business throughout the year on behalf of the churches and the delegates, but once a year we gather to make those big decisions. And so actually this year it will be a virtual meeting, and that will be very different, you know, for us. So we're already starting to plan what worship will look like, how we will do our keynote speakers. We're going to offer a lot more of the workshops, and we'll be able to do that, you know, at different times. But it's just such a great way of connecting with other churches. And I think that often when I hear a church say, I don't really know what it means to be, you know, a UCC church. Why are we in the UCC? I often know that that's a church that probably has not had a lot of delegates that have gone to annual meeting, nor are they a church perhaps that have had delegates that have gone to General Synod, which General Synod on the upper level is all of the delegates from churches, you know, throughout the United Church of Christ that gather together for a meeting. And so I think part of it is a family reunion too. It's reminding us as churches in the United Church of Christ who we are, how we're connected with one another, how we can learn from one another, and how we can support each other.
Very good. And yeah, you're going on virtual this fall, so that'd be.
We are.
This is the time to sign up for an annual meeting because you don't even have to drive. So.
I know. And I really, actually, I'm going to lay down a challenge for Evangelical UCC. I would love in the years to come to see more delegates come to the annual meeting. I think it's a great way to really get to know more about what the conference does. Sometimes people go away from that day and they say, well, I didn't know that we, you know, did all those things. Because we also have people who talk about the programs in the conference. You know, I remember a delegate last year from one of our churches, the first time they came, and they were just so excited because they didn't know that we had an Ecuador partnership, and they had family connections to Ecuador, and they were so excited. And they said, you know, I've been a part of UCC Church for 20 years in this conference. I had no idea that we had a partnership with Ecuador, nor did they know that we had started a green initiative through Du Bois Center. They were really excited about that ecological, you know, piece. And so it was just, that was fun to see someone say, I get it now, just from being able to be at a meeting where you hear what things are being done, you know, and how we're connected.
Talk a little bit about that. This is great. You just went right into it. The Ecuador partnership.
So the Ecuador partnership was started actually by a former global missionary, Gus Keither, Reverend Gus Keither, he was on staff at St. Paul UCC in Belleville. And he had a lot of connections with the community in Ecuador and had friends that were missionaries. And it really started organically. And out of that, we decided as a conference that we would start this partnership and begin to build schools, medical centers. We also, when we have teams that go over to Ecuador, they do building projects. They offer scholarships, especially to young girls in that community. That it's a community in Oaxaca that many of those young girls would not have the opportunity to have an education because it's really not promoted. And so the families don't make that a priority, and maybe they can't make a priority of having the finances. So there's just so many ways just in that area in which Illinois South Conference has an incredible impact. And even as we talk about, you know, our church's wider mission, when you think about the dollars that you're giving to OCWM, I mean, those kind of connections of how you are making a difference. So, you know, people will say, oh, you know, we can cut that in our budget. You know, we don't really need to give to OCWM. And most of the time what they don't realize is how many ways that mission goes out and really affects the lives of so many people, not just through Illinois South Conference, but all the things that we do really in the United Church of Christ. So it's actually, if you want me to pivot, I can start to talk about what in the world OCWM is.
Go for it.
Okay, so
you stepped into it.
Yeah, so we love acronyms in the UCC. So, you know, most of the giving envelopes, it's OCWM, and most people are like, I don't even know what that means. It is an acronym for our church's wider mission. And when churches in the ENR tradition, when they were still a part of the Synod, they would pay into the apportionments. And those apportionments would help staff set in those staff members, as well as to give to the denomination. What I think is interesting is when we became the United Church of Christ, people started to shift and thought of that as, that's just a mission that we give. But if you think about other denominations, they talk about it as apportionment, because they know that it takes so much to be able to do kind of the administrative work on the local level and for the denomination, you know, to exist. So our church's wider mission is actually the full revenue for the Illinois South Conference. We would not exist, and I think we would hope that churches would also understand that really they wouldn't exist with the type of resources they would without the conference. And so when we talk about mission, you know, our church's wider mission, I think in some ways that's a misnomer because it sounds like, oh, that's just our charity work. But when you go to an annual meeting, for example, of the Illinois South Conference, and when you look at the budget, that budget is, we do that on what our churches give to OCWM. And so when churches over the years have said, well, I don't like what the denomination is doing with that particular thing, and they cut their OCWM, what they don't realize is really what they have done is they have cut the dollars that are really the resource dollars in the conference to resource their churches. So for example, before I came, there was a time, and Joan can attest to this, where we had a wider staff, you know, in the Illinois South Conference. There was a time where there was one conference minister and 2 associate conference ministers, which meant that churches had a lot more access to those staff persons. Well, as churches started to say, we don't need to give to that, or gosh, we didn't like that one thing that the denomination did, so we're going to take that completely out of our budget. What happened was we had to cut a lot of staff, you know, and so right now in our conference, I often will say I'm the only one out in the field. I'm the only field person because we have a conference minister and then we have support staff. We don't have a big enough budget to be able to resource to have, you know, an associate conference minister. You know, so sometimes when churches will say, well, why don't we have more people on the ground? I'm like, well, it's because we don't have, you know, those monies. And if you look at what a conference does, and some churches think of really the conference only being there when you're in a transition, when you're in search and call, or when you're in a crisis moment. It is some of the heavy lifting that we do. You know, there's a good portion of my work, I was going to say most, that's not actually true. Good portion of my work is in pastoral transition. So when a pastor, you know, retires, then, we're helping a church through getting an interim and then getting ready for a search process. When a pastor takes a new call, the same thing. And so we help in that time. All of the resources that a church really has in a search and call comes from the conference. We're also there in times of celebration as well as, conflict. So we resource the churches in that way. We have resources to be able to say too, let's say you're looking at a building program. I've had several churches. We have one church, for example, that was interested in looking at solar for their church. And what they realized was they could get a lot of incentives through the state to add solar panels, to their building. And, they reached out to us and said, how can we do this? And we were able to connect them with Cornerstone, which Cornerstone is an institution, financial institution of the United Church of Christ. And by me being able to write a letter of reference and help them through that process, they're able to get a grant and monies and loans to be able, to do that. So when churches understand they have resources with the conference, then they reach out and say, hey, we're doing a building project. What kind of things, can you help us with that? Or maybe it's, we're looking at some new curriculum. What we're doing with our Sunday school just doesn't land anymore. What can you do? Are there resources that you can offer through the denomination, or are there educational opportunities, that you can suggest that our folks go to? So what I see is not only are we resourcing in times of transition, but one of the things that I really hold dear is that the goal of a conference for me is so that churches are able to do good, healthy ministry, and so that's resourcing through programs, it's resourcing through, mission ideas. It is also resourcing pastors. One of the interesting things is that there had been a shift several years ago of conferences moving away from pastors seeing the conference as their pastor. And I've never been willing to give that piece up, because a local church pastor really doesn't have often their own pastor. Who do they turn to, when they need some spiritual help, when they need those resources? And so one of the areas that we have really looked as an initiative that I've really pushed in this conference is that the conference will also be a support as much as we can to our local pastors, because we believe strongly if you have healthy pastors, you have healthy churches. Just like in the opposite, if you have unhealthy pastors, you have unhealthy churches. So we offer, things like boundary training and helping with the connecting people with spiritual directors, or we've started to offer a pastor's retreat, every year, that we subsidize a good portion of that, so that we are offering resources, to our pastors. Right now, I will say that I and our conference council really has been digging in and trying to resource the churches during this time of crisis. Every week we've been sending out update letters as we have been kind of just disseminating the information and trying to offer churches helpful resources of what are some things that you can do in this time. We created an Easter worship service, and actually by the end of the month, I'm creating another worship service so that we can give that to pastors as a gift to say, we realize you probably have not taken a Sunday off in a long time, and to get pulpit supply in a pandemic looks very different. And so I said, I think we need to create another video so our pastors, can take some time off. So right now, a lot of the work in the conference has been how can we resource our churches in times of, crisis, and like creating documents of here's some good practices. We have also done a lot of hands-on work with the payroll protection program, with helping churches get grants, also helping to figure out staffing models. Some of our churches immediately said, we don't know what we're going to do. We don't have the resources and the reserves. So what kind of staffing model, can we have? And we are really concerned, especially for our churches that at this moment are in between pastors, and so we resource them. So it wasn't like, my gosh, you're in this time of transition and you have no support, whatsoever. So there are a lot of things that happen on the local level. And when you give to OCWM, actually 75% of that stays in Illinois South Conference. 25% goes on to national and supports all of the programs that are available through the United Church of Christ. Okay, so that's a big overview, but do you have questions about certain programs or?
Folks, that'll be on the quiz later.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. And some of my work is not, it's not, really glamorous, but part of the resource too is we have legal counsel that is at the local level and through the United Church of Christ. So I am constantly going to training sessions, about what new things are happening so that we can resource our churches. One of the things I like to say is, I would like to know this information so you don't have to scour around, and try to find it. And so a lot of times churches will try to do things on their own. And I'm like, just reach out, because you know what? We may not have the answer, but we'll get it to you, or we'll connect you with someone who does have, that answer for you.
There's a couple of teams. You call them teams here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought were interesting. With the local church empowerment, is that the same as the church development, or are those two separate teams?
So our local church ministry team is the team actually that started at Easter time, saying, this is going to be a very difficult time, especially for our churches that are without leadership at this moment. And so they were the team that said, we need to do an Easter worship, video. They are the team that made a concerted effort in this last year to be really supportive of our pastors. So they started the pastors retreat. They're also working on right now some workshops that will be available before annual meeting to resource the churches. They did a survey last year, and I know that your church did a great job of filling that out. Rodney was really spearheaded that, and asked the question of, where are those areas that you want to work on? And so they took that and said, we're going to run with that and be able to offer workshops. So our local church ministry team, it's not a development team where they're really looking at new church starts. They're looking at what are the resources, whether that be Christian education, mission resources, stewardship resources, those things that our churches are saying, we do these programs, but we don't have enough information, or we've been doing this program for a while, what can you help us with? So actually this year, one of the areas that they're going to be looking at for those workshops is, how do you have ministry for children and youth that is not personality centered? Because one of the things that they saw in surveys and they saw as a trend was often children ministries and youth programs were so personality centered, that a church would have a span of time where they might have a strong youth program or a strong program for children, but as soon as that person moved on, those programs kind of fell through. And so what the team said was, we really want to be able to have some workshops to empower people in the pews of how to do really programs and ministry that reaches out to children and youth and really creates those strong relationships with young families. So it's not personality centered. If you look at, for example, the statistic is that children's pastors, youth pastors often only stay at a church for about 24 months. And for our churches that have traditionally had just a youth worker or a Christian education director, that's kind of been the case. Now, you actually are a little bit different on that. You guys are a little bit of the unicorn because you've had CE people that have been there much longer, than 24 months. But if you look at that average, that kind of turnover, you can't build programs that are just, based on a personality. So that's what local church ministry does, is thinks about all of what we call kind of the basics or the pillars, of the church: worship, Christian education, stewardship, mission, and outreach. And that team looks at how can we resource our churches.
Very good. I could have you talk about outdoor ministries, but you folks know pretty much that here, don't you? You're fairly familiar?
Well, one thing I do want to say really quickly about
please.
Our outdoor ministry program that many people don't realize is we own and operate Du Bois Center. That is a camp of the Illinois South Conference. And so when you talk about what you give to OCWM, that is not just Highland office. It is all of the staff and the programming at Du Bois Center. And so again, when churches cut their money to OCWM, what that often means as a trickle-down effect is we don't have as much staff and resources for our outdoor ministry to maintain, the camp, but also to staff the camp. So for many of our churches, Du Bois Center is at the heart, of what they believe as mission, and it's a very important thing to them. But what they don't realize is that a big revenue stream for Du Bois Center is also OCWM. In fact, it's not the revenue that they really make on summer camp or, those sort of things. Sometimes on our summer camp, we break even. It really is dependent on how generous our churches are with OCWM of what are the programs that we can offer, for our children and youth and the retreats. So I know in some conferences, the camps are separately incorporated. Ours is not. So we share a unified budget with Du Bois Center. So it's not Highland office, and then Du Bois Center. We are all one.
Yeah, and more conferences are losing their camps.
We are been joking that we might be the last one standing. And we hope, and honestly, we hope that we can be. It's a ministry and mission that's so dear to so many people in this conference, and we are one of the few conferences that still has maintained our camp.
And it's impressive because you are not a large conference, really.
But we have a lot of people that
Right.
people do give gifts straight to Du Bois
Right.
Center, too. So it's.
But I'm talking about number of churches compared to other conferences.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So.
2 years ago at the annual meeting, we were very close to, I mean, it was a very contentious vote on whether we funded Du Bois or not. And then last year it was not. It just kind of, yes, that's going to be one of our ministries, but it was close.
Yeah. Yeah. Ron, you're absolutely right. I mean, full disclosure, several years ago, there was a lot of anxiety about, you know, if people didn't get to OCWM, could we afford to keep a camp? And so the conversation was, you know, really, can we afford to subsidize the camp and to keep that going? And one of the things that we decided, and I actually said, was I would like to put a moratorium on that conversation. And what we'd like to do is to say, let's try some new initiatives. You know, we've had the same formula. We keep saying, well, if we just have more, you know, kids that go to summer camp, you know, then we'll be able to do the things that we, you know, want to do at Du Bois Center, which in reality, the way that it works is that's not really where we make our money necessarily, is on the summer camp. It's on the retreats. But we started the Du Bois initiative that we call Green Du Bois. And we are working with universities and different groups to say, how can we use this land and be ecologically wise? But also it's looking at what are some new ways that we can bring some revenue streams into the camp. And that's been a really good, just a good think tank. And there's been some incredible things that came out of it. So you're right, Rodney. That's why at annual meeting last year, if you were in that room, you probably felt even an emotional shift in talking to the camp. You could feel that people weren't tense about it, because we've said, we're not going to talk about closing the camp. We're going to talk about, let's try whatever we can, kind of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, because it's not accurate to say that we've tried everything.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, and I can tell, we're having the same discussion in Illinois too. So,
yeah.
Just briefly, and then we'll open up for a few questions at the end here. Because the Church and Ministry Committee, just explain what that is.
Sure.
Because oftentimes congregations don't really realize what that is until it kind of comes knocking on your door.
So Committee on Ministry is probably the team that has the most work on their plate. They are the team that authorizes and oversees the standing of pastors. And so we talk about the authorization, that meaning that we work with those that are considering full-time Christian ministry or considering seminary. So we call those persons our members in discernment, which means that they're discerning whether they have a call into parish ministry, maybe chaplaincy, even not-for-profit. And so one piece of the Committee on Ministry's work is to help nurture those persons who are looking at, I feel like I have a call and I want to go and do, a track of education, and I might be looking towards ordination. And ordination in the United Church of Christ is actually you're being ordained not for a particular conference, although it is the conference that does the ordination service, but that you're ordained for the entire United Church of Christ. And so when a pastor is ordained, then when they are serving in a local context, that is where they have their standing. So this is interesting because even as we had kind of open town hall meetings, at your church, I was very aware of that there wasn't an understanding of what we call the three-way covenant. And that means that the pastor has a relationship with the conference, they have a relationship with the denomination, and they have the relationship, with the church as well. And so a pastor has their standing in that conference. I should say a settled pastor, because Pastor Eric's like, wait, I'm in Illinois, and I'll explain that for a minute. So a settled pastor, a permanent pastor, they will have their standing in that conference, which, they are serving. And our commitment through the Committee on Ministry is to provide, support to our local church pastors, to help them. Our hope is to help them to be as healthy mentally, emotionally, spiritually, even financially as they can, so that they in turn can help lead a church in healthy ways. And so part of the work that Committee on Ministry does is provides training, so that you can be able to say, okay, here are some things that you're going to have to think about in ministry, and here are the ways that we can support you. We offer continuing education. We will every year we ask our pastors to fill out just a form to say how things are going. It's kind of a check-in, and it used to be that kind of check-in was just like somebody filling out a piece of paper, and they're like, oh, I got to fill this out and send it in to, Committee on Ministry. I've been impressed with our Committees on Ministry since I have been here, is they take those reviews, they read through them, and they reach out to those pastors and say, what kind of support can we have? Can we be to you? Sometimes when a Committee on Ministry reaches out to a pastor and says, we're concerned about you. It seems like you have a lot of stress right now in your church, or we know you're going through some family problems. They may say, no, I don't need that help. Other pastors will say, you know what, actually, I do. And our Committee on Ministries help pastors to get involved in counseling programs, to have spiritual directors. We have also, in more recent years, and I've been very proud about this, we've had several pastors in Illinois South Conference that were dealing with some chronic illnesses and some serious illnesses. And the Committee on Ministry reached out to those pastors and said, how can we be of support? Can we help you to go through the process of taking maybe a family leave or a medical leave? And we can work with the congregation about what that looks like, and then help you have coverage, so that you can take care of yourself. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care, of others. So Committee on Ministry, really their goal is to see that we have healthy pastors to serve in our churches. On the difficult side of that is a Committee on Ministry is notified, and in a formal complaint, notified that there's some real concerns about a pastor's behavior, ethics. Then it is the responsibility of the Committee on Ministry, because they have oversight over that pastor on behalf of the whole denomination. They go through proper procedures and processes. And as you well know, and I said it to you before, that's the least pleasing part of the work of the Committee on Ministry. And these are team members that are voted in. I mean, these are paid staff, folks. So these are local church pastors in the conference and lay people, from the conference. And I'm always just in awe of the time commitment that our Committee on Ministry, takes for this work. We usually meet once a month, and it's been interesting lately. We have had a lot of our members in discernment that have recently graduated from seminary, and so they're getting ready for ordination. And so our agenda has been just stacked full of walking our members in discernment through those last stages so that they can be ordained and so that they can be the future leaders in our churches. And that takes a long time. We also work with licensed pastors. So not every conference has licensed pastors, but we still have a licensure program so that those that maybe can't afford to go through seminary or don't feel like seminary is the path for them, but they would like to go through a pathway for licensure, we actually work with a seminary, and there's a program called Life Program that we offer courses, and they go through clinical pastoral education. And so what we hope is that as they go through these processes of whether it's licensure or ordination, that these are persons that are going to be fully equipped to be able to serve in our churches.
Excellent. We got, here we go. We got 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So I'll open it up. Remember, if you're going to ask a question, turn your mic on, please. So any questions for Shana? Just to let you, I'm on the Committee on Ministry in the Eastern Association. So you hear, I got to explain, as far as this conference here, and every conference is different, but I noticed there's an expectation that clergy will do continuing ed. They will improve themselves. Every 3 years, there's the boundary training. The check-in. You're a small enough conference, you can't really hide.
No.
Really?
No.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it is true. And I will say that we have rarely had a pastor who is non-compliant. So we require boundary training every so years, many years. I think it's every 3 years. And we also require so many hours of continuing education. We have some conferences that have pastors that are non-compliant, that they don't fulfill those. You're right, Eric. We're small enough. We're going to find you and go, now, come on. Why didn't you go through that training? Yeah. One of the other trainings that we will be really looking at offering for pastors is the anti-racism diversity training. They feel like the world that we live in right now, that's an important piece, as well.
Bob Nagel, did you have a question?
Yeah, my question has to deal with finances. I haven't paid a lot of attention to the conference, but my interest would be what percentage of the funds that we donate, OCWM, goes to what programs? Do you keep a record of that?
So how we do that is when I talked about the split, so your church gives a certain percentage. What happens is that 75% of that stays in Illinois South Conference and 25% goes on to national. So in terms of, a breakdown of what those particular programs are, I think it would be helpful if you looked at a budget from the Illinois South Conference to see where, those monies are being spent. And I will say to you that a good portion, of course, goes to Du Bois Center and the programs that we do there. A good portion also is with staff and programs that we have in the Highland office. One of the other areas that we really try to work on is the communication piece, so that not that we can always provide every single program, but we keep track of when there is a seminar or a webinar. We are one of the few conferences that has a newsletter every week that we put out, that in that newsletter has, resources from all over the United Church of Christ to say, if you're working on this, attend this. On our website for during this crisis moment, actually, we have kept the front page all about up-to-date information about what's going on, with the crisis. And we also have added worship resources now, because what we realized is there are a lot of churches that are saying, we're really kind of tapped out and we need more worship resources. So we've been, adding to that as well. So Bob, it's a great question. And I think that like I said, I think the misunderstanding is that people will think, well, our money is going to support this special interest that we don't agree with, and so we're going to cut OCWM. And the sad thing is what they've done is they've cut the resources that could be available to their local church.
So how much of a decision do you have on where the 25% is used? Is that all UCCs?
Oh, so the 25% goes, yeah, so the 25% goes to national. And that, if you think about, and gosh, we didn't really have much time to talk, we could do another session on national. So monies at national has everything that creating programs and curriculum and scholarship for seminary students, our global ministries, so when people think about like a special interest group, it's so little. I mean, it's the broader spectrum of everything that comes out of the United Church of Christ for curriculum, and resources. That's where, our monies are going. So for example, some of our pastors use every week I forget what it's called now, the sermon seeds. I think they've changed the the name of that. What that is it's a online resource to help prepare for worship service. There are free resources on the denominational website for Bible studies, for youth programming, for children's programs, as well.
Daily devotional.
Daily devotional, absolutely.
Which
And
I should put that out.
It's just tremendous when I stop to really think about all the things that we offer through the denomination. We are rich with resources. I think that it is churches that don't understand what they have access to. They'll hear something in the news about something that they see as negative about the United Church of Christ, and they'll run with that, and they'll forget about all the incredible programs that can support a local church because they don't know about it. And so that's actually one of the reasons that we've continued to commit to having a weekly newsletter, is because we want to pass those things along. Churches that immediately went for a payroll protection program loan, or even the grants, through the UCC, they saw that information first in Weekly Connection, and then reached out to us and said, "Hey, help us. I read this article. How can we do this?"
Bob, you brought up a good point. We talked about annual meeting, for the Illinois South Conference. Sending delegates to the annual meeting not only comes back with the ideas, they come back with the financial report. If you're interested, come back and report to you. Where is your OCWM money going and how is it being used? So it's crucial you send people to the annual meeting at the conference level.
Yeah.
And Shana, you brought up the weekly email that comes in. If anybody would like to sign in on that, that comes in onto your email every Tuesday.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
I love that,
Oh yeah.
And I think our churches also like to see what other churches are doing. And that's been a wonderful piece too. We've added in our update letters, we're calling it ISC Spirit, and just lifting up the wonderful things that are happening in our conference. You hear so much bad news that I was like, let's lift up the good things, that are happening, the ways in which people are in mission and connecting with each other and really giving. So Joan, you're right. I really encourage, especially if you're on a team, if you're on consistory with your church, if you're on a team with your church, get on the email list for Weekly Connection. It will help you to know what's out there, because we provide links to that will go straight to a website.
I started reading that before I even came to Highland, and you post. It was always the posting of the upcoming sausage dinners in the
Yes, that's really important in Illinois South.
I go, what is this?
Yeah.
Anna, what percentage of the OCWM then actually goes to mission work, whether it's helping tornado victims here in the United States or some
Yeah.
overseas? Do you know what percentage gets used for that kind of stuff out of the national money?
Well, I will say, I don't know exactly what percentage. What I will say is I'm glad that you brought this up, because when you think about what National does, I mean, when there is a natural disaster, it is monies that you send in through OCWM and like through One Great Hour of Sharing, that those teams are dispatched. And Disaster Relief Ministries is funded by OCWM. And in fact, there were times in this region, especially during times of the flood, that it was those monies that churches had given to OCWM that enabled teams to come in and do sandbagging, you know, and to really help the community. We have one church that in more recent years, they had lightning that struck their spire, and actually the church then caught on fire. And not only did teams from disaster ministry come out and help assess, but the insurance board, which is a partner of the United Church of Christ, the insurance board of the United Church of Christ, immediately the next day had people on the ground helping that church to assess. Cornerstone came in and helped, and they were able to rebuild. In fact, one of the first things that I did when I got here, and this was just such a celebration, was just that celebration of their new sanctuary and that building. And they realized out of that crisis how much the denomination helped them. And they said over and over again, they wouldn't know what they would have done, but how moving it was that, first of all, I know that my predecessor was there that afternoon. You know, it happened early in the morning, and that afternoon she was there with the church. And then the next day, people from national settings of the denomination were there with the church to help them not only grieve, but also say, okay, how can we help you literally rebuild?
Any other questions? There we go. We're close to the, we're 8 minutes over. Well, we got started late. There we go. Shana, thank you very much. We're going to close quick.
Thank you.
And then
Thank you.
I will open mics if you guys want to chit chat for a little bit, you know. So may God's presence be with us. God's Spirit guide us and empower us. And as disciples, we go out and serve in Christ's name. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen and amen.
Amen. Thank you. It's so great to see all of you. Stay safe and be well.
Good
Thank
information.
Thank you.
Hey, I can't unmute. There we go.
Oh, thank you. Take care of everybody. Now I'm unmuted.
Yeah, I don't have my unmute button here. Uh-oh. Hey, you guys take care, okay?
All right.
Good. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Shana. Good to see you.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
You look way too comfortable there, Bob Nagel.
I'm ready for a little nap. It may turn into be the whole night. Have a good night. See you later.
You too. You too.
You look like you had a nap, Bob.
Okay. That's enough out of you, Red.
Okay. Goodbye. See you.
Okay, let's eat. I was thinking we could put these on the porch and then.
So what do you think, Joan?
All right. It was so good to see her.
Yeah.
She's